We just witnessed Super Bowl 60, and we already debated with the Patriots, a team that even belonged there, were they one of the worst teams to make the Super Bowl? Look, props to the Seattle Seahawks, they won, but we also got to look at them. I mean, it wasn't that impressive a performance. Sam Darnold, for what it's worth, sure he didn't turn the ball over, but is he a quarterback who really looked like he belonged as a championship quarterback? I mean, Chris, is it possible that he's maybe one of the worst quarterbacks to be a Super Bowl champ?
I mean, I think he's in the discussion, but at the same time, when we were diving into it and looking in the stats here, I was blown away. Like how many bad quarterbacks have actually won Super Bowls.
And so, yeah, like Sam Darnold isn't exactly the worst. He didn't have a bad game. He hasn't had a horrible career. He's redeemed himself. But you're right. We looked back and thought about who are the worst quarterbacks who have won a Super Bowl. Well, Sam Darnold didn't make the cut, but let's look at who did. So, who is number one on your list?
I think number one. I think there's almost like a consensus here at number one, right? I know we both have the same number one, and I know a lot of people have the same number one, and that is Trent Dilfer in 2000 with the Baltimore Ravens. You look at it, Trent Dilfer somehow played 13 years, credit to him, but in those 13 years, threw 129 interceptions and only 113 touchdowns. Never once in his entire career on any season did he complete even 60% of his passes. And even in that Super Bowl, he hardly helped them win at all. 12 completions on 25 attempts, only 153 yards, only one touchdown. This guy better be sending Ray Lewis a Christmas card or a Christmas gift every single year for giving him a Super Bowl victory.
Yeah, I mean, when we decided to do this, like, okay, worst Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, the very first name that popped to mind was Trent Dilfer. I mean, there was no debate. I didn't even have to look at the rest of the list. I mean, look, there's some other quarterbacks that had worse careers, and we'll talk about them, in a minute. But that season, I mean, we talk about how sometimes a quarterback can carry a team, not just an offense. Like, think Pat Mahomes from the last couple of years. Okay, this is the opposite. This team carried its quarterback, and you know what the Ravens even thought about him? He was there for 1 year. That 1 year, they happened to win the Super Bowl, and next year they ditched him for Elvis Gerbach. I know you remember who I'm talking about. Nobody else does. So that's what they thought of Dilfer. They didn't even keep him after winning the Super Bowl. And it's crazy because not only is that arguably the best defense ever, I mean, I think it is. You got like the 85 Bears, and then that Ravens team, to me, it's pretty clear it's them. But that defense wasn't just dominant. The running game was so good they didn't even have to pass the ball. They had Jamal Lewis, who a couple of years later ran for 2,000 yards. Not many running backs have done that. They had Priest Holmes, who was one of the best fantasy running backs for several years. He was the backup running back on that team. They literally did not need Trent Dilfer to do anything, and I guess he did just enough nothing to not lose the game for them. Anyways, so he's number one. That seems pretty obvious, but who is next on your list?
Next, I got a guy. This one hurts because I vividly remember watching Doug Williams, light it up in the Super Bowl and being so excited as a Washington fan. But man, I mean, when I dove into it, I did not remember how bad Doug Williams actually was because again, I still was relatively young here, but not to mention he played many years like with Tampa Bay and stuff. But in the 9 years that Doug Williams played, he completed 49% of his passes, not even 50% of his passes, and he had 100 touchdowns to 93 interceptions. But I will say, he was at least a monster in that Super Bowl, like an absolute monster in that Super Bowl. Super Bowl, but man, did that feel like the outlier? Like it just felt like that one game, everything he had went into that one game. The rest of his career, horrible.
All right, so I'm going to defend Doug Williams to some extent because you're right. Like, he's probably the flukiest quarterback to win because, of course, nobody expected him to play, obviously being the backup only because of an injury. But I will say with Doug Williams, like, he just had some bad luck because he got drafted to Tampa Bay. And for those who might not know, back then, he was drafted in 1978. Tampa was an expansion franchise. Like, they had just come into existence 2 years before, and they had the worst season ever in NFL history. Like, they were just a laughing stock, right? It was a joke. And so he was, I don't know, put in such a tough position. Like, he couldn't succeed, and yet he kind of put up decent numbers. I mean, not too bad, at least. He threw for some yardage and some touchdowns. and then he was out of the league for a couple years and then came back as a backup. And I just feel like he's always had the talent. He was just kind of put in a bad spot. So uh, I don't have Doug Williams on my list, but number two, the guy who's kind of the similar, situation there, only played because the starting quarterback Phil Simms was hurt. I mean, a lot of people know the Jeff Hostetler for the Giants. Look, he stepped in. He didn't lose the game. He was okay there. He threw for 222 yards. He didn't turn the ball over. That's all he needed to do because that defense, guys like Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks, I mean, they were so good. They had Otis Anderson running the ball. He just needed to not lose it, and I mean, he didn't. And I'll say good for him. He parlayed that into a pretty fat contract to be the starting quarterback for the Raiders, and he wasn't terrible. Like he wasn't. He's one of those quarterbacks. He's not the answer, but he's not the problem either. He's just kind of there. But as far as Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, I can't put him any higher. As far as quality wise, he's number two on this list because really the Bills probably should have won that Super Bowl. All right, let's get to number three. Who you got?
Yeah, now I do have Jeff Hostetler on my list as well, but I have him a little bit lower down here because I think there were some quarterbacks that are worse. And again, when I was doing the research, I was shocked at how bad Jim Plunkett actually was, because this guy didn't just win one Super Bowl as a starting quarterback for the Raiders. He won two, and I have no idea how. He played 15 years and had a 52 completion percentage, but worse than that, had almost 200 interceptions, 198 interceptions, and only 164 touchdowns. Mind-boggling that he won two Super Bowls, but what was even more mind-boggling to me is in those two Super Bowls, he somehow threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. It's like on the biggest stage, he finally stepped up and played well. I guess the team just carried him to the Super Bowl, and then when they got to the Super Bowl, he's like, all right, I'll finally show up and play. But man, a guy who had 30 plus more interceptions and touchdowns, barely completed half of his passes, won 2 Super Bowls. That's insane to me.
Yeah, he's probably out of all the quarterbacks we'll talk about the most Darnold-esque. Remember that he was the number 1 overall draft pick way back, and he played for a couple of different teams. He was with the Patriots at first, and bounced around and landed with the Raiders, and then I guess he's just a late bloomer. But I'll talk about another guy who bounced around. Number 3 for me. Look, I know that he probably has one of the statistically the best, maybe the best. I don't really know in terms of fantasy points. Maybe the best statistical performance in any Super Bowl. And yet, Nick Foles, to me, is just one of the worst to actually hoist the trophy. Look, again, mad props for doing all that, the Philly special, that shootout, coming back in the fourth quarter. That was one of the best Super Bowls, period, to watch. I mean, I loved watching that game, and I always love watching the Patriots lose in the Super Bowl. But still, come on, Nick Foles, that was such a fluke, that whole playoff run. Like, I get it wasn't just the big game. It was the entire playoffs and the end of the season. But Nick Foles, that was it. That was not only the peak, that was it. This guy had a decent statistical season a couple years before, and he was just a career backup. In fact, it's insane. If you think about it, he played for 6 different teams in just 11 years. And it wasn't just injuries. I mean, he just never could be trusted long term. So, I get it. He had an amazing game, but to me, he's not what I would consider a great quarterback other than that 1 month that just happened to be at the right time. All right, now you got, again, career backup Jeff Hostetler down here at 4. I mean, look, you think that really Jeff Hostetler can't jump above a guy like Jim Plunkett?
I don't. When I looked at the numbers again, I was like, Jim Plunkett was horrible. Doug Williams was horrible. And look, I did almost put Nick Foles on the list as well. But then when I looked at it, I was like, okay, yes, a career backup basically who won a Super Bowl, but his numbers weren't really that bad overall. I mean, they weren't great, obviously, but not compared to some of these guys. So I got Jeff Hostetler here at number 4. You already mentioned everything. I'm not going to rehash it here. This guy played 15 years and only threw over 3,000 yards twice, but at least he did throw for over 3,000 yards twice, and he did have more touchdowns than interceptions, which I can't say for guys like, Jim Plunkett or Trent Dilfer.
Yeah, again, like I said, he wasn't bad. He never led the team to any bad losses, didn't make a lot of mistakes, but I think you should do a little better than that, right? And so, look, we're going to get to some picks. I think people will be surprised here. some names, that you feel like, what are you talking about? These are great quarterbacks. Not necessarily. But look, number four guy I think has just skated by way too much because of the team he was on, Jim McMahon. Let's face it, he was not a great quarterback. And in fact, the numbers show that he really wasn't very good at all. And just keep in mind, he had the benefit of a guy named Walter Payton to hand the ball off to whenever he felt like it, and the arguably best or second best defense ever of the Bears and Mike Ditka back then. So Jim McMahon, again, didn't have to do a whole lot, and he was fine. But let's face it, over his career, he was just never that good of a passer. Even that season, that 1985 season, I mean, what was he best known for? Doing the Super Bowl shuffle and dancing and talking to the reporters and making a fool of himself. That's what he was known for, his personality. But look, in that season where they won the Super Bowl, 184 yards passing per game and a total of 15 touchdowns. And the next year, when you thought, well, this team is so good they could repeat, he had 5 touchdowns and 8 interceptions before getting hurt, and far fewer than 200 yards per game. And then the rest of his career, a lot of injuries, so maybe you can blame that. But let's face it, this guy just wasn't very good. And if he wasn't on that team, he probably never would have won a Super Bowl at all. Now, this one I kind of can't believe, though. Like, not just once, but twice, Peyton Manning on your list. How do you justify a guy who's won it with 2 different teams?
All right. You got to take this one. You got to hear the context for this one. This is specifically 2015 Peyton Manning only. Obviously, Peyton Manning, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, although he was not very good in Super Bowls, even the 2 that he won. But in 2015, he not only was arguably the worst quarterback, maybe to ever even play in a Super Bowl, win or lose, but he had a horrible, horrible year the whole year. In 2015, he completed just 59% of his passes and had 9 touchdowns versus 17 interceptions. That is not what we think of when we think of Peyton Manning. But it got worse in the Super Bowl. Somehow the Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl, and they won quite easily, by the way, with him going 13 for 23 for 141 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 2 fumbles. They legitimately would have been better off if he just spiked the ball or took a knee every time he snapped it rather than attempted a pass. So I really think Peyton Manning's 2015 performance gets overlooked because he's Peyton Manning. But my goodness, he was easily, in my opinion, maybe the worst quarterback to ever even play in a Super Bowl, let alone win it.
Yeah, I can't argue that. I remember watching. It was kind of painful, and like we felt like you just knew that Denver was going to win anyways, but it was despite him, not because of him. All right, look, number 5 on my list. I know everybody just loves and thinks that Joe Namath is one of the best quarterbacks ever. I'm here to say he's the most overrated, and no, not just because he played for the Jets, but I'm telling you that's why he's so overrated, because, again, kind of like with Jim McMahon, it's like, let's not look at the numbers and the performance and what they actually did. Let's just, look at what they're saying and all the quotes and the sound bites, and that's all it is, right? It's a lot of fluff here. Sure, he guaranteed it. They won the game. Not because of him, right? They had a 100-yard rusher there. They had a really good defense that shut down the opponent. He was okay, right? He was good enough. He didn't lose the game, but he didn't have this great performance. And let's face it, if he wasn't in New York, if he didn't get all the media attention, if he didn't, have this personality, and again, nothing against Joe Namath. I like the guy. I've never had anything against him personally. It's just the fact that he is overrated as an NFL quarterback. And, if that game turned the other way, then all of a sudden we'd be thinking about him a whole different way. Look, for his career, I don't think people even realize how ineffective he was. For his career, he had 173 touchdowns, 220 interceptions, more picks than touchdowns, not just barely. That's a massive difference. And you know what? In fact, that season, before they got to the Super Bowl, he had 15 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. He only completed 49% of his passes. I'm not sure why, anybody doesn't realize this, but again, I guess it's just more fun to go with the narrative, not the numbers. If you didn't catch that other video, we broke down the Patriots. Where do they rank as far as Super Bowl teams? Do they even belong in the big game? We talked about that. Check it out right here.